Welcome to the Echo Chamber. We're talking about the digital divide. Each of us is going to share our thoughts for 60 seconds. And we're going to have a quick conversation. I believe, Rifqi, you've got some thoughts you wanted to share.
Okay, I will start by talking about online or digital discrimination that happens based on our digital features, which leads to the creation of our digital identity. It is a bit concerning since our digital identity doesn't reflect our physical body's feature and its affiliation. In several contexts, we are even categorized by the system as something that we don't even know what that is. A straightforward example came from the racial categories that I had to choose when I applied to do this university. There was only other Asian background or simply Asian categorization provided on the web page, which did not fully acknowledge my identity as Indonesian. It probably did not lead to any discriminatory act from the uni. Yeah, after all, the categorization is only used to capture the degree of diversity on this campus. But the fact that there was no option to clearly declare my Indonesian identity is frustrating and somewhat discriminative. I said discriminative because the design of the system doesn't recognize the Indonesian ethnic group as a feature that represents the number of students or even residents here in the UK. So that's my thought. I don't know. Do you guys have any comments or not? Thank you, Ben.
Brilliant. Thank you, Rifqi. I believe, Louis, you're the next one who wants to share some thoughts.
Yes, I'll go for it. So I actually just want to quickly reflect upon a really fascinating article that I stumbled upon a few days ago. And it's about a very specific dimension of the digital divide, about the question regarding this divide is to be or not to be algorithm aware. And this article shows that there is a huge inequality regarding how well people understand algorithms. Specifically, the paper shows that a person's grasp of how an algorithm functions is very closely related to both education and income. And the author suggests that there is a clear gap between the two group of people, between people who are aware of algorithms and those who are not. And I was thinking, given that algorithms shape so many aspects of life, it seems that these findings merit further consideration. For example, is it maybe necessary to teach people in primary school how algorithms work so they can maybe challenge or question them later on in their lives? Yeah, hope I can stir up some thinking with this. Yeah.
Brilliant. Thank you, Louis. Max, I believe you've also got something you want to share.
Yeah, sure. Well, when I first thought about the digital divide, to be honest, like what popped in my head first was like a picture of my grandparents and memories of having to help them print out emails so they could, read them. So yeah, that was my first impression of the digital divide. But I did one of the required readings for this week, and it introduced an interesting concept, the concept of different levels of inequality or on the internet or in the age of the internet. One being like the physical level, having like physical access. Second one being like having the skill to interact with people on the internet and using the tools of the internet and the digital age. And thirdly, like the inequality derived or resulting from the outcome of said skills and or access. And actually, I found that really, really interesting in relation to two things that happened actually on this very day on the, I believe it's the 14th of March. It's that's the and what happened is GPT-4, I believe it's called, or GPT-4 was launched. That was launched behind a paywall, and everyone else has to join a wait list. So like thinking about those different dimensions, like that is very much restricting like that, like physical access to this tool. And the paper that we read, it suggested that like the discussion is like should very much be focused on that like third dimension, like what are the implications of having like different levels of access and skills. However, like this kind of implies that like the discussion should be redirected to the very foundations of the debate, so like who has access and who doesn't, because only then we can talk about like the outcomes of using the internet. And tools related to that.
Brilliant, thank you, Max. So I've just got a few thoughts I'm going to share myself as well. I want to touch on something that's in one of the readings that's talking about the link between digital and social exclusion. I think digital is such a powerful tool to help combat social exclusion, but often the kind of groups that experience social exclusion and poor digital skills, a bit like your grandparents, Max, and limited access to devices. For me, the question it really raises is, who are we building technology for? I don't have an answer, but I kind of can say from my personal experience that the kind of digital have-nots that I've worked with, it's hard to change their status, but because it requires both financial and practical help. And even the language that we use can exclude people. And I've got a really nice example. I recall talking to an older person, and I asked the question of the group, who's used the internet? And a couple of hands went up, and so one person didn't put their hand up. And I went round and they each said something, and this person later on said, "Oh, I was looking on Facebook and these photos of my niece or my grandniece or whatever." And I was just like, they didn't realise that Facebook's part of the internet, and it's an idea that sometimes it's a bit like Rifqi's example. Language is exclusionary, and it's funny that the divide isn't quite where we think it lies. So obviously we've all had a chat. Is there anyone got any questions that they'd like to ask on what someone said?
Yeah, I think what's really interesting, I think about all of our contributions, actually, what maybe unites our thoughts is this question whether the digital reinforces existing divides, if it creates new ones. Rifqi was talking about race. Ben and Max, you guys were both mentioning older people. And yeah, I'm wondering what you guys think. Like, does the internet, does the digital, the social media create new divides? Is it just old divides which are perpetuated? Is it maybe both? I think that's maybe an interesting dimension that all of us kind of touched upon.
If I can quickly jump in there, like I think that's a very valid point, and I think like it's very context dependent. I think in a lot of instances, like we've talked about algorithmic bias, for example, I don't think like necessarily new inequalities are introduced there, or at least not primarily. Like it very much works as an amplifier. However, I do believe that there are also like new inequalities being introduced. For example, when you've got like rural areas and that they simply don't have the physical infrastructure of the internet. I think like that's a very good point.
I think it's interesting actually that when we look at what we understand I think a lot of everything is definition. And you can see the digital divide in like lots of different ways. And I was really struck by Rifqi's talking about our identities online. I was thinking about this idea of digital avatars that was really popular a few years ago. It's kind of calmed down a little bit now. And for me, it's again, it all links together. The algorithms, it's all about personalization and what you want to get from something. And I think that is such a big thing with any digital divide, is that a lot of the people I worked with, they wouldn't say there was a digital divide because they didn't know what they were missing. They didn't see it as something they needed, and it can be so many different things.
Right. Okay, I want to reflect on something else. Can I do that?
Sure.
Okay, Max mentioned about his grandparents, right? So I was thinking about the digital immigrant. That is a group that when they born into this world, the internet doesn't exist at all. I think we all here, you and me, Ben, we are a digital immigrant, and I don't know, Max and Louis probably is digital native. But from our discussion here, I reflect that the notion of digital immigrant is not a single. We cannot define it as a single entity. Within that group, there's also a difference. I mean. You can see Mac's grandparents as the older person who no longer can learn about anything but internet, and hence they cannot access it. But the digital immigrant, younger immigrants like me and Ben, still have the capability to engage with the development of technology. So from this discussion, I think it broadened my perspective on the idea of the binary groups between the digital immigrant and digital native. if that makes any sense. I don't know.
It makes a lot of sense. I think that's really interesting. You bring this up, and in a previous course I've once taken, we've actually like almost had an entire session about this question of the digital native, and I think the crucial point, you already brought it up, is that it's a bit problematic maybe to say that we have digital natives and digital immigrants, because it splits people according to their digital skills into two groups. Whereas you pointed out yourself, there's a lot of shades, and there's a lot of old people who are maybe more proficient than some of us, you know. So, but yeah, what were you guys thinking, Ben and Max?
I think it's interesting that you talk about digital natives, because, you know, I remember when the internet was first becoming a big thing for me. Like, I was about 13 in school, so I was probably young enough that I was able to pick it up relatively quickly. And I've always been quite digitally kind of interested. You know, I was one of the kids who dialed up when you still had a modem that made funny phone noises to get online. But even when I look at my parents, so my parents, you know, I'm in my late 30s, parents are in the 70s, and their digital experience is very different. They've got very different digital skills too. They're pretty bright people, but their individual skills and their experience is so different. My dad still types like this, you know, whereas my mum types, because, you know, that's just the way that they do things. And she learned through something else. It's almost, for my mum, it was that something else got into it, but what they use digital for now even is very different. And I think that's an interesting reflection on the digital divide. Is there's almost a divide between what we want from it. Yeah, my dad sits on Facebook. My mum does not sit on Facebook.
I wonder to what extent, and that relates to the concept of like digital natives and digital immigrants, to what extent like are the debates we're having in the digital spheres merely a mirroring of debates that we have in other spheres, right? So for example, if we think about lacking skills in the digital sphere, like what I have to think about is the fact that I myself, a digital native, should have had programming classes in school, which we didn't have because there weren't any teachers there. No one could teach it, so like it just didn't happen. And like those debates like are very much the same thing as we have for like general like general like quality of education, or when it comes to like physical access, like broadband connection to the internet, for example. It's the same with, you know, like mobile network connection or electricity in remote areas, all that sort of stuff. So like, to what extent do you believe the digital divide is so much a digital divide more than a societal divide?
I think the reason it's because the core of information is now all in the internet. You can find the opportunity, you can find any information on the internet. No longer you find any actual information in the poster or some other physical printed things like
Newspapers.
yeah,
Those things.
it's still relevant, but when you compare it to internet, when the news is gonna produce like minute by minute, and when you compare that to the printed one, it's kind of like you can see the gaps, you can see the disparity, you know. So I think our discussion regarding the groups, the digital native and digital immigrant, it's the core idea is that if the digital native kind of like prioritize their searching resource on the internet, and the digital immigrant is kind of like have to catching up that idea, that method to be able to receive the same amount of opportunity information. I think that's a problem, because all information right now, it's the internet. It's in the internet. I don't know.
I think that's really interesting, and I'm actually going to draw us just to a close and just say thank you guys for coming. Thank you for anyone who's watching it. This has been our echo chamber. If you'd like to get involved in something similar for next week, I plan on running this for the next 2 weeks of the course, and I hope you enjoy. Thank you very much.